Awesome. Well, we are just hanging out, waiting a few more minutes for people to join this breakout, and we're just excited to be here. And we're just being real informal for the next couple minutes, waiting for some more people to hop on before we start our actual Q&A. So we just want to welcome you, and we're just getting to know each other. So you can kind of just listen in as we ask each other some silly questions. I asked them what they were wearing from the waist down, and we're probably not going to share that information with everybody. So you missed that. It was really exciting. We'll leave it to your imagination. Yeah, who else? I guess I like the question that was presented earlier. If you're wearing shoes, what are your favorite kind of shoes to wear? Let's just keep it at that. What's your favorite brand of shoes?
I like hiking shoes the best. They're firm on the bottom and have a lot of good support.
Okay. Are you one of those people who actually hike, or do you just like to wear the hiking shoes?
Oh, this chunky butt doesn't hike anywhere.
Thank you for your honesty. I love that. I wear hiking shoes, but I don't hike. That's awesome. I like Vans. Not stereotypical at all, but it's true. I like my Vans.
I like high tops, so Vans are definitely one of my favorites as well. I have really long legs, so I feel like buying pants that are long enough is always a hard thing. So I always like high tops.
Oh yeah.
Would it cheat, a bit, by covering the ankles a little bit more.
Yeah, so they're practical, not only for aesthetics, but for you're a tall dude, so.
Well, there's a tall person secret for you guys.
Yes.
California, so I love flip-flops, like rainbows, or I don't know if you all know Olapais. Those are some of our new favorites, or my favorite.
That's awesome.
Are you beach people? Do you like the beach? Yeah.
I like walking by it. We live actually about 4 long blocks from the beach, so we're down there quite a bit, but I don't know that I'm like
we don't love the
sand.
Kinda. We like looking at the beach, but we don't necessarily like being in the sand so much.
Awesome.
I think there's probably beach privilege at play.
Yeah.
Gotcha. That's awesome. Myles, what are your shoes of choice?
I love sneakers. All sneakers. Mostly Vans and Adidas. I've been pretty committed to both brands since I was a tween, and they've served me well over the years. I am currently not wearing shoes, though.
I concur with Vans and Adidas. Those are awesome. All right, well, I think we should go ahead and get started because this is not a breakout about shoes. So we're just going to go ahead and jump right in. So we want to welcome everybody who is attending this breakout of Ask Anything LGBTQ+ panel. And this is along the track for parents and allies. So a lot of the questions are going to be directed to be most helpful for that demographic of people. However, we'll keep the Q&A chat or the Q&A function open. So we'll try to keep an eye on that as well. But we're going to start with some pre-scripted questions and go from there. So thank you panelists for being here, and thank you for your vulnerability and your willingness to just help the audience today with these questions. So what I would like to start out to do is just to have you guys introduce yourself briefly, share your name, how you identify, your pronouns, and one word to describe you. You only can use one word, okay? So Randall, would you like to start?
Sure. My name is Randall White. My pronouns are he, him. And one word to describe myself, I'd probably say eclectic. I suppose I like a lot of different things, a lot of different interests.
Awesome. Great. Well, thanks for being here, Randall. Myles, would you like to go next?
Sure. Myles Markham. I use he, him, or they, them pronouns. And one word to describe myself is slow.
Can Can you expand on that as far as why you chose that word?
Everything I do is at a speed that is oftentimes seen as less than what people expect for me to do. I take a lot of time to think and to process and to move and to drive and to get from one part of the house to another part of the house. I'm a slow reader. Just in my life, except for eating. Eating is the one thing I do quickly, but otherwise
Awesome.
slow.
That's awesome. That's great. All right. How about Nick? Can you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Nick. My pronouns are he, him, they, them. And one word would be nerd.
Nerds are popular. I love it. How could you share with everybody how you identify? Nick, how do you identify?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm intersex, trans, non-binary, and gay.
Okay, thank you, Nick. And Myles,
So
did
my
you share
pronouns
how
are he,
you?
him.
Okay. Myles, did you share how you identify?
No, I can do that though. I am transmasculine, non-binary. I'm queer, Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Christian.
Thank you so much. All right, how about Susan? Could you please introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. I'm Susan Flaming Yeats. I identify as queer. My pronouns are she, her. And word to describe me would be inquisitive.
Good word. Okay, how about you, Lindsay?
Yeah, I'm Lindsay Flaming Yates. I'm married to Susan. I identify as bi and cisgender female, so my pronouns are she, her, hers. And my word would be, I'm torn, but I'm going to go with intentional.
Okay, well, thank you. That just wanted you to quickly introduce yourselves. And next, we're going to do a quick raise of hands. So I'm going to ask about 15 questions, and you raise your hand if this is true about you. Okay. Number one, raise your hand if you were raised in a religious home. So all of you. Number two, raise your hand if you were involved in a church or place of worship when you were growing up. So everyone, oh, Nick too. Okay, everybody. Number three, raise your hand if you have ever prayed for God to change your orientation or your gender. Everybody, except for Nick. Is that right, Nick? You're a no on that one? Okay, I want to make sure you can hear me.
I'm a no on that one.
Okay. Number four, raise your hand if God answered your prayer and changed your orientation or your gender. I'll wait like a half a second because I already knew it was going to be no, he didn't. Number five, raise your hand if you had a good experience when you came out to your parents or when they found you out. Okay, ish, yeah. Raise your hand if you have considered suicide in the past. Okay, thank you. Raise your hand if you have attempted suicide in the past. Thank you. Raise your hand if you love Betty White. Come on, come on. Okay. Susan, I will talk later. Raise your hand if you have struggled with your faith due to your church's and or family's response to you being LGBTQ+. Okay. Raise your hand if you currently attend a church where you feel accepted and safe. Okay. Raise your hand if you have experienced recent struggles within your family due to political differences. Okay. Raise your hand if you ever thought you were going to hell for being LGBTQ+. Okay. Raise your hand if your coming out process involves a change in hairstyle. Just those two. Okay. I did too. Raise your hand if you wish you were straight or cisgender. Okay. Last one. Your experience, raise your hand if your experience of being LGBTQ+ has grown your relationship with God. That's awesome. Okay. Thank you guys for doing that. I hope that's helpful for people watching to just identify with certain ones of you that they might have questions for based on how you answered those questions. Now we're going to jump into our actual questions for individual panelists. So we'll just jump right in. And my first question is for both Susan and Lindsay. And I know, Susan, you said you identify as queer and Lindsay identifies as bi, is that correct? Okay. So my question is, in your experience as a married couple, what did your, well, or before you were married, what did your parents struggle with most in understanding your bisexuality or queer identity as a couple? And what would you share with these parents in response to those struggles that would be helpful for them? Susan, did you want to go first?
Yeah, so I identify as queer, but if you drill down a little bit, I would say bi. I just kind of prefer the queer term for a few other just different reasons and just the general nuance of it. But I think the bisexuality term, what has been challenging, because I think there's a misconception for people that if you're bisexual, you can just simplify matters and choose somebody of the opposite sex. And so there's this kind of sense of, well, if you're attracted to both sexes, why don't you just be with a man? And that sort of kind of makes things simple. And so there's of course, a lot more range and nuance to being bisexual. It's not 50-50 split between who you're attracted to, and then there's other layers of romantic attraction versus sexual attraction and where those attractions are focused. And so I think there's just some misconceptions and stereotypes around bisexuality that make it challenging to explain, which is part of the reason why I just prefer queer, because especially when you're introducing somebody, bisexuality is a little bit of a deeper layer of complexity that requires some explanation. But I think it's taken time to tease that out. And so from a parent perspective, I think just appreciating the complexity that an individual needs to go through to understand and arrive at bisexuality is helpful. And then understanding that there's it's not a simple choice of let me just make life easy and choose to be with a man so that I don't have to deal with the nuance of my sexuality.
Yeah, that's super helpful. Go ahead, Lindsay.
Right. I was just going to add a couple things to that. I think on the flip side, I think that a lot of the stereotypes can surround sort of promiscuity or wanting to or acting on whoever you would want to be with at any given point in time. And I think that can be equally misleading or just very minimizing. So I think I know in our family dynamic, when I came out to my parents, I came out to them as bi, and I think we were all extremely new to the conversation at that point to be real transparent. So I think in some ways that I mean I remember my mom actually articulating like well into my process, like that she was still hoping that I would potentially or praying that I would potentially meet and marry and fall in love with a man. So I think, which I think in hindsight, I realized, yeah, like that made a lot of sense given sort of their story and their context. And yet simultaneously, I think prolonged some of sort of potentially the grieving process or maybe acceptance process too. I think one other piece is we get the question a lot, if I'm married to a woman, why do I identify as bi? Or you know, how am I bisexual if I'm in a same-sex relationship? And I think just simply put, orientation isn't dictated by who you're with. And so whom I'm attracted to and how I'm attracted to men or women or is not dictated by my commitment to Susan. So I think in the same way that other people who are in committed monogamous relationships choose not to act upon attraction outside of that, that would hold true for us. And that doesn't, our orientation feels fixed, or my orientation feels fixed in a way that's not dictated by my relationship.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's super helpful from both of you. I want to go to Nick with the second question. Nick, you identify as intersex. It's the I in the LGBTQIA. Could you just take a minute and kind of explain what intersex is? Nope, unmute yourself first.
Sorry.
It's okay.
Intersex is a little bit different from other categories in the LGBTQ plus community, starting with the fact that intersex is not a gender identity or sexuality, but it's an umbrella term for over 40 variations of being human that fall outside of male and female. We face unique challenges in healthcare, documentation, and basic life that are different from other members in the LGBT plus community. Intersex variations can be chromosomal, hormonal, gonadal, genital, or any mixture of those. For instance, I'm an intersex, I'm a 46XX, 46XY chimera. I started off as fraternal twins, one boy, one girl, who merged into a single zygote before I even attached to my mother's uterine wall. So literally from the outset, have neither been male nor female. And I feel it's also important to say right now, in context of everything, that being intersex does not somehow make me more trans than any other trans person, nor does it make me any more of a real trans person, which I've heard said often. Trans people are trans people, whether we're intersex or not.
Great. Thank you, Nick, so much. I'm glad you're on this panel representing the intersex community. I want to go to Myles now. Myles, you identify as trans, correct? Transmasculine, transgender umbrella. So when you came out to your mom as trans, you told me that her response to you was to say, no, you're not trans. Explain to whoever's watching why it is so important for parents and everybody really to receive what their child and what people tell them as far as their identities.
Sure. Yeah, I think for any trans or really even any queer person, that moment is so delicate, it's so tender, and it's so vulnerable. And at any age, a child is, not coming to you and sharing this information about themselves because they want to hurt you or because they want to make you angry or retaliate. We're sharing because we want to be known. We want to be seen. And for us, coming out or sharing about ourselves is an act of love in that way. It's an act of pursuing the bond and trying to move closer, not farther away. And so because of that vulnerability, I think when you come to a person, and I guess I'll be more personal, like I came to my mom and said, I want you to know that this is true about me. I had spent so much time, working up the courage, and the strength and the faith, to get to a point in my life where I could do that. And for her initial response just to be, no, you're not. I know you better than you know you. There was no way for me to experience that as anything except for invalidation. And that sort of interaction, I think, leaves an indelible mark. Whatever happens in that conversation, and I think even the first few, after that, lives forever in a person's body and in their psyche. And in that way, I think that when that information is shared with you, um, it it's incredibly vital. That even if you have a lot of questions, that space is sort of set in as safe and open, and not judgmental.
Yeah. So if I could ask a follow-up question to that then of you, so what should parents do specifically when they are questioning or doubting what their child is telling them to be true?
Sure. My quick answer is, at first, keep it to yourself. I think it's perfectly natural to have doubts and to have a lot of questions, and even a lot of fear, when a child comes out to you or shares new information, especially new information that, for my mom, she linked with mental illness. She linked with violence. She linked with crime. The only representations she had really ever seen of trans people were negative, and therefore, I think that initial reaction was born, of those kinds of stereotypes and ideas that were presented to her. So, to me, one of the best things a parent can do, and my suspicion is that anybody who's watching, this video has already had that first conversation. And therefore, if they haven't reached out to start building online community with other parents of LGBTQ people, and specifically other parents of trans people, whether they're older or younger, I think having that community is going to be very critical, and that is a perfect place to work out those doubts and those fears. I participated in a panel that was in the audience. It was a PFLAG event, and a lot of grandparents specifically were on this call. And I noticed in the chat that there was one parent who had a lot of questions, and I saw so many other parents responding in the chat like, hey, here's my email, here's my phone number, reach out, I'd love to talk with you about this. And so having that, I think, is the best first step, especially if you have questions, especially if you have doubts. You don't have to ask your child all of them. There's so many people, I think, who would love to form supportive community for a parent, and it's out there. And all these virtual resources, I think, are expanding now, and so you can find it.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much, because that is a real life lived experience for so many parents of LGBTQ kids, and they need someplace to process outside of their kids. So that's great. All right, Randall, I'd love to go to you and ask you this question. Excuse me. Many LGBTQ plus people of faith question, doubt, or even leave their faith, unfortunately. But your faith has remained intact and strong. So what do you attribute that to? Because you're kind of a minority in the LGBTQ plus community, as most of us question, doubt, or some even leave their faith. Yours has remained intact and strong. So talk us through that.
Well, for me, growing up in the church, being very close to the church, being in a very good community, is definitely a big part of it. I've been to different churches throughout my life, starting out with probably the more charismatic Pentecostal churches. My mom, she would take me to these churches. She was part of a Baptist, kind of like, then I think eventually Lutheran background. So, very interesting conservative background there. I feel like for me, the big moment that kind of like helped me keep my faith and reconcile was when actually college. I chose to go to a private Christian university right out of high school. At this time in my life, I was very active in the current church we were attending. I was very involved with the band, worship team, youth programs, and I had lots of friends. And it was a large church, and it felt like a big family. And I kind of felt like I was in a place in my relationship with God that I kind of wanted to keep this going. At this time, I wasn't out to myself. I hadn't reconciled, and I didn't identify as gay. Which that means when I say I wasn't out to myself was basically I probably realized I was gay initially at 12, but I hid it away. I didn't want to acknowledge it. I didn't want to accept it. And I believe that by denying that part of myself would be kind of a way I glorify God, would be like, okay, I'm not going to acknowledge this. I'm going to ignore it and I can overcome it. That was kind of like my, belief. So I kind of stuffed it down inside and lived my life the best way I thought I had to. Went to church, I prayed about it often, and I just kind of kept fighting it. I thought that, if I can eventually beat this or maybe find answers, which is the one reason why I decided to go to a private Christian university, was because I was thinking, well, maybe if I go to this university, maybe I'll find out more answers about myself, and maybe God can somehow change me there or something. So it's actually part of going to the university is a big part of my reconciling story. Because when I first initially went to this university, when I applied for it, I didn't have the funds to attend actually, but basically through my church, they kind of came together. A couple people drove me to church. A very nice couple drove me to church on Sunday mornings, and I told them about my predicament, and they were like, "Well, Randall, we believe that God wants you to go to this university, and so I think you should open up about it and tell people that you need help." And I was very against that. I don't like telling people when I'm, I don't like asking people for money. Definitely, I don't like sharing these things. So, but she kind of kept pressing me on it after Sunday, saying, "Randall, you should probably ask for help." And I decided. She said that she believed that if I did this, that God would open doors for me. And I was like, well, okay. So I basically told them that they can, talk to their friends and family about, maybe a fundraiser. And I started opening up to my peers as well. Very awkward thing to do, but I did it. And well, the semester was starting, so they basically were nice enough to give me a donation to pay for my first semester of college. And they said by the end of the semester, you have to, hopefully have enough money to pay us back. And this was probably around $15,000. So I was like, oh yeah, okay. Well, I believe that God will provide. Hopefully. Very nervous. Good way to start your freshman year of college, for sure. Wouldn't recommend. So as the semester went on, I kind of stayed in my studies, and I would ask them once in a while, so how's the money coming along? Is it all right? So they say, like, don't worry about it, just focus on school. I'm like, okay, I'll try. And after a time, something really amazing happened. They basically told me one day, I asked them, so how's the money going? And they said, well, Randall, something crazy has happened. We believe this is a miracle. Money's just started pouring in from all sorts of places, churches we don't know, families we don't know, people from all over the country just kind of started sending letters in the mail and hearing about my story and donating. And she said, Randall, your first semester is paid off, and also your first year of college has been paid off completely. This is a miracle. And I remember calling my mom and telling her, Mom, guess what? We did it. My first year of college is paid for. And she reminded me of a time where we were younger and attending one of our more Pentecostal churches. A prophetess approached us, a self-proclaimed prophetess, woman approached us after church and said, oh, you have very nice boys here, miss. This one here, he's not going to have to pay for college. And I was like, remembering this, like, oh my God, that crazy lady from church, I guess she was right. And it was really touching just to see how God helped me in this way, me being, inside, really a gay man, accepting me this way. And so later on, when I reconciled my faith during college, I came out, I decided to come out as gay, and It helped me knowing that God was on my side and God loved me this profoundly. It definitely helped me continue to keep my faith to this day, honestly.
Yeah, wow, thank you for sharing that amazing part of your story. And that's amazing that you interpreted that as God loving you and taking care of you in a very tangible way. So that's amazing. I want to go back to Susan. Susan, I want to ask you, when you came out, your parents began a journey of studying theology and questioning their long-held belief about same-sex relationships. So how important was that for you? And what would you tell parents or anybody really who might be hesitant to study or question?
Yeah, I it kind of came out in dribs and drabs over time to my parents, and over time, as it became more and more clear that this wasn't a phase, my mom in particular started really reading and studying and going online, listening to podcasts, and just really immersing herself in the conversation. And we come from a pretty fundamentalist evangelical background, so that was definitely not popular within her community. And so that just meant so much to me that she would take it upon herself to really learn, especially given how sensitive the topic is in my parents' faith community. And my dad came along a little slower. Actually, he didn't really jump on board with Lindsay and I until after the wedding. He did attend, but it was touch and go if he was going to show up. But after he knew, ring was on the finger and it was sort of a done deal, he has now become really the LGBTQ Christian crusader at their church. He's got a whole reading list. He's got a manifesto. He's got his elevator speech that he gives to people to feel them out. And it's really pretty remarkable kind of transition that they've made. And I receive it as an act of love that they've taken that step to engage that way, because it wasn't easy for them. And really, it feels like an act of allyship that they would bear some of that burden for me, because they had a lot of conversations with family members and friends that I didn't have to have. And so they took that on and kind of in some ways shielded me from some of those painful interactions, and were willing to incur some of that cost on my behalf. And, we're willing to ask hard questions, and we don't agree on everything, but they've shifted in some dramatic ways. And it was always, something I made clear that I didn't have the expectation that they would totally change in their theology, but the fact that they were willing to ask those hard questions and look at the long-held beliefs and really re-examine them and expose themselves to people that thought differently about LGBTQ sexuality was really just such an act of love. So I think what I would say to parents is that to not be afraid of the questions and exposing yourself to ideas that maybe are different than what you're historically comfortable with. There's, really solid, theologically sound people on all sides of this issue. Previously, I thought that people who, because I held totally a conservative traditional view for years until I realized, oh wait, maybe my experience doesn't jive with this, and I had to start asking questions. But I understand that perspective because I had it myself, and I always thought that people who held a third way or an affirming view were super fringy and it didn't have any kind of theological rigor. And so I would just encourage parents to kind of lean into some of the conversations, because there's really a lot of theologically sound people out there who have a wide variety of views. And it's not this fringy thing. It is compatible with a lot of people who think well and hold a high view of scripture. So, and I don't know that everybody always has to agree on anything. I think it's just creating space and being willing to ask questions and re-examine things. And I think that we see that in scripture, that God isn't intimidated by our questions, and that there's room for us to kind of press in and question.
Yeah, I love your answer. I love that last point. And I think that's the most comforting thing, especially for parents, that if it's Spirit-led, if the Holy Spirit's leading them on their studying, then they don't have to worry about where it leads. They just take the journey, right? And then just trust that that's going to be Spirit-led. So thank you for answering that in such a helpful way for parents especially. I'd like to go to Nick next. Nick, you were assigned female at birth, but you knew you were male by the age of 3, which is unbelievably young. Your parents were not open to that. So in what ways did they attempt to affirm a female identity as you grew up? And then I'm going to ask you a follow-up after that. And I just want to thank you in advance for sharing, so personally with us. I know it's going to be really helpful. But what ways did your parents attempt to affirm a female identity in you, even though you knew since the age of 3 that you were male?
When I was a kid, I would get mistaken for a boy, and in quotes. And if I didn't correct them and tell them that I was a girl, I would be punished. I was also made to go to dance class so that I could learn how to move like a girl. I was taught how to put on makeup very, very young. My ears were pierced very young. My mom would do my hair every single day, even when I was in high school, because I would pop it back in a ponytail and be done with it because she wouldn't let me cut it short. She'd curl it, put it, bangs, barrettes, you name it, just because I wouldn't do it according to how she thought was feminine. I wasn't allowed to play sports at all, not even in girls' leagues, because of the fear that 1, exercise would make my body masculinize more, and 2, that my body would be discovered by classmates. That included gym class, of not being permitted to take showers after gym class, for fear of discovery. Hobbies would be forbidden if they were considered too masculine, such as the time I bought myself a model and I had to give it away to my brothers because it was, boys do that. There was also gender modification that included sitting, speaking, and learning how to have feminine mannerisms. I even learned to speak with this high voice because I got in trouble for speaking with my natural voice. My natural voice is about an octave lower from what I usually speak with, but if I use this voice, I actually start to panic because of the trauma of the past.
Thank you so much, Nick, for sharing. And my follow-up question to you is, in light of that, what effect did that have on you in those years, and then even long term?
I have complex post-traumatic stress disorder, another anxiety disorder, a completely separate panic disorder, as well as dissociative disorder. I have ulcers, trust issues, difficulty in finishing tasks, executive dysfunction, an extreme fear of failure that impacts a lot of my life. I'm so hypercritical of myself that it even causes trouble at work. It impacts my relationships in every single way imaginable. I'm a great friend who feels the need to fix everything and rush to every rescue, often at the cost of my health, because I struggle to believe that anyone actually likes me or just me. And that is totally a leftover from childhood. Sorry.
Okay.
I've had to distance myself from my family for my mental health. And I try to keep the door of communication open, but I have to close it when they get to be too critical or I become too uncomfortable. One of the hardest things was I went to visit my parents, and I'd been homeless most of my adult life because they kicked me out. And they wanted to come see my new home because I've been homeless for so long. And I had to tell them they have no place in my life out here, because my relationship with them has to be on my terms because I can't trust them any other way. It's all about my well-being because they still don't accept who I am.
Well, I think I can speak on behalf of everybody that I'm sorry for what you went through. And I'm going to come back around to you and ask a follow-up question that I think is going to be really helpful to people watching in light of your story. But thank you so much for sharing so vulnerably with us. let me go to Myles. Myles, here's your question. So many, if not all parents of trans kids have fears and concerns about them taking hormones and having surgery. So what are just a few thoughts that you can share to help parents responsibly lead and support their child, especially minors, through a medical transition, especially if their child's a minor?
Yeah. So I guess I'll start by empathizing. I totally understand why a parent would approach these kinds of interventions with concerns for safety and what lifelong care would look like. But then I would encourage parents to imagine that that is the same lens that physicians are taking into trans affirming care as well. That lens of prioritizing safety and lifelong care. So along those same lines, what I think is always very good for parents to know is that since 1979, there's an organization called the World Professional Association for Transgender Health that has promoted the highest standards of healthcare through the formalization of kind of document they call the standards of care. The SOC is the acronym. And the entire point of the affirming approach to transgender and gender nonconforming youth is actually to not push them in any particular direction, but to give them the warmest, safest space to explore identity and gender expression. Pushing them toward hormones or pushing them toward surgery goes entirely against this principle. And there is a lot of misinformation about trans-related medical care online. Most of this is put out there by groups who describe themselves as gender critical feminists. Another term is trans exclusionary radical feminists. And because of this, I always make sure that I am comparing what I'm reading online with the notes that I've received from my primary care physician, from my endocrinologist, and cross-referencing what I am getting online with the professional medical and mental health fields.
So follow up, what would you say then to parents who have a child, especially a minor child, who wants to transition as soon as possible because they're experiencing all the multiple things that happen when you experience, that experience of, whether it's gender dysphoria or just, feeling that anxiety. What would you tell parents that aren't yet ready for their child to do that, and yet they're seeing these negative symptoms in their child because they're not yet able to move forward?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think sort of back to, my point about when a parent's experiencing doubt or has a lot of questions is you form a community. And so it's not just about having one doctor, it's about having, mental health support. It's about having faith support, right? Like this is the significance of having an affirming faith community is not to convince you to pursue one particular outcome, but so that you have the space. One way I think about this is the word affirming, whether we're talking about trans experiences or we're talking about theology, does not necessarily, at its best, force somebody to believe one particular thing or to pursue one particular outcome. It just gives you the space to follow, where you believe God is leading, wherever that may be. And that, I think, is also true for trans youth. And so in terms of trans affirming healthcare for minors, what is more common is you're not really pursuing hormones, you're pursuing hormone blockers, right? So it actually
Yeah.
just creates a delay. It gives
Mhm.
you, again, more time and more space, and the ability to form, a more informed perspective. And so that's when I think you can make those kinds of decisions. I don't feel like I'm in any position to tell a young person or a parent like when they're ready or when is like the right time to make any sort of a decision about affirming their gender. But I think those social steps, right? Like really supporting a young person as they're exploring names, they're exploring pronouns, and being curious about their experience, and being willing to look at their own gender. I think it's really beautiful when parents are able to kind of ask themselves about why they identify the way that they identify and sort of what gendered experiences they've had throughout their life, and not and a lot like not telling the child that because this is my experience it must be your experience too, or what if you just looked at it this way, or what if you just looked at it that way. But really allowing this young person to lead. I appreciate everything you shared, Nick, and I think most of us do have some kind of semblance at 3, 4, 5 years old, even of what's going on for us. We don't have the language, we don't have the words, but it's very uh visceral, to know like there there's something else here. And I think being able to hear that and not have to make a judgment about it, and to create the space so that all possibilities can be explored, um, that's what affirming gender care is all about.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. No preconceived destination. And that's really freeing for parents to be able to move forward maybe with less fear. So thank you for answering that follow-up that I did not prepare you for. I want to go to Lindsay. Lindsay, I would like to ask you this. Your parents hold a traditional view of scripture currently, yet they attended you and Susan's wedding. What would you say to parents who either are now struggling or will struggle with attending their LGBTQ plus child's wedding, or even accepting and loving their partner?
Yeah, I mean, I think something that was really formative at the outset of sort of our process as a family, as I was navigating this and sharing my story and coming out, was sort of the framework that we don't, and I did that as an adult. That would be my first disclaimer and caveat, which I think is a game changer in some ways. And I was financially independent and so forth. So I want to be careful to not minimize anyone's experience or story as I share mine in that. But I think the sort of the belief and framework, and I got this from spaces like QCF and GCN actually, that we don't have to agree to love well, and love has to transcend agreement on things. And so I think within our wedding and our marriage, and I think the further I moved into this process, I think the more you realize there's so many things we don't agree on, and yet what does it look like to sort of love radically within that? And and so I think, yeah, my parents really embodied that in my coming out process. They were very warm and gracious and stunned, I think, like all parents probably are, or many. And yet they chose to move towards me, to ask questions, to be curious, and to just effusively express that they loved me. And so when it came to our wedding and marriage, and I think even dating was another sort of level in the process that was uncertain and new for all of us, and sort of required a lot of communication and sort of a lot of honesty. And so in the wedding process, I would say, I think by that point, um, yeah, there just was a foundation of honesty, communication, of grief all the way around, I would say. But I think something that was really clear in all of our minds, I would say, is parent, like can come and love us well. And that doesn't mean that they're agreeing, or I'll use the language of condoning. And that's a really complex way to navigate, right? Because this was our day and the most exciting thing in our lives. And so we had to wrestle with, do we invite people that, that are potentially going to feel tension in this moment, and so there's just difficult choices all the way around in that. But if your child invites you, I think one of the most painful, I think second, Myles described well the coming out moment and the significance of that and the indelibility of that mark that you leave. I think in the same way, if your child invites you to their wedding, that is a huge deal. And that, because you go, does not mean, we were under no impression that there wasn't grief for our parents in that, and that wasn't, a challenging day in some ways. And yet I think they also chose to effusively, they gave us a huge financial gift, which we were not expecting. Their generosity within it was really a profound picture of sort of love in complexity and love transcending agreement. And I think that has spoken more to me and to us, probably than anything could. And it's been such an embodiment of like Jesus to us in a way that I think has brought us all into deeper relationship and into greater intimacy. And I think there are moments, I was actually telling someone today that I experienced that my parents might actually like Susan more than they like me. And I think I think there's just been a genuine, I'm a better person married to her, and they see and experience that. And so I think I'm so grateful that they've been open and loving and have welcomed us with incredible hospitality into our family and her into our family in a way that I think we've all just really been blessed by. And she loves them well, and they pursue her. And it's just been, honestly, it's totally exceeded my expectations of what this could look like. And I think it's been just really powerful for us, for sure, but I also think for them. And so I think choosing sort of to love and to do that tangibly, I just think God is just really pleased and delighted by that. And I think there's incredible fruit from it. And I think the wisdom of playing the long game is really critical in this conversation and in these relationships.
Yeah, thank you for sharing all that, to know that it didn't start out where it ended. So to keep the long game in mind is a great point. Okay, I want to follow up with Nick and then go to Randall, and we have about 7 minutes left. Nick, my follow-up to you with your story is, in spite of the abuse and the trauma that you went through and non-acceptance you experienced, you still desire a relationship with your family. Why?
I want a relationship with my parents because there's always a part of me that is very much the small child who wants to be loved and accepted. Did they say they loved me? Sure. But there were times that those always came after I had performed satisfactorily. Always. When I looked pretty in a dress, when I passed as a girl and no one questioned, when I managed to correct everybody who called me a boy all day long. Their love was always tied to performance, and I knew it, even when I was small. I would hear the things they said about me. I would hear my father calling me a monster. I would hear my mother saying that she's my cross to bear when we were in church. She would tell me I was ugly and that I'd ruined her life. They would discuss and debate my humanity right in front of me because God only created male and female. And yet, with all of that, deep down inside, there really is just this little boy that wants his mom and dad to love him.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. I think that's really powerful for parents, especially to hear, because I think that's true. I know that's true for me, and I don't want to speak for others, but generally speaking, I think that just God puts that in us. So thank you for sharing about that. And, I hope that my hope would be that will continue to be something that God redeems, and that can be restored, at least in a healthy way on some level, probably with many boundaries. but thank you so much for sharing and being on this panel. Randall, we're going to end with you. You came out to your mom 5 years ago, and she responded lovingly, yet she had a sweep it under the rug approach. You shared with me that she never really talked to you about it after you came out. So your mom passed away last year. I'm so sorry. What would you say to parents who find themselves in the same situation of wanting to love and support their child, but finding it very difficult and uncomfortable to talk about it?
I would just say, I feel like when I came out to my mom, like, she got very quiet. And I can kind of tell she probably didn't know how to talk to me about this. For me and my family, we didn't really talk about like relationships or sex or very much anything like that. So I feel like when I came out to her, it was a bit more awkward than it needed to be, because we didn't have like the language or the space for the talk about relationships or sex or anything. So here I am coming out as someone who's attracted to the same sex to her as gay. So I mean, I didn't know how it was going to turn out. I didn't think it was going to be a bad situation, but because of how she's shown us how she loves us unconditionally, me and my brother, I have a twin brother. He was kind of a person, when we were little, to be difficult, and he's the kind of the troubled child. And there are situations where I felt like she definitely could have responded very negatively to him, but she embraced him and loved him just the way he was. So I felt like that kind of created a safe space for me to at least tell her. At this point, I was already living. I was already in school, so I wasn't living at home. So it was a little easier to come out to her in this situation. But I feel like the main thing I wanted to know from her, despite no matter what she thought, whether I had her approval or not, I kind of just wanted to know if she still loved me. I wanted to hear her say it. That's really what I wanted. And so I remember in the moment when I came out to her, I said, I just have one question to ask you, and is that, do you still love me? And she said yes. She said yes, she did, and that she'll always love me. Sorry. But that's what I needed to hear from her at that time. It was exactly what she said. But I just feel like it's important to have a relationship, to create space to embrace your children as they need to be, meet them where they are in their moment, because that's where I was then.
What would you say in the last minute and a half to parents who kind of have that sweep it under the rug mentality, that find it really uncomfortable to have the dialogue, have the conversation? What would you say to encourage them?
I would just say, like, it's okay to be uncomfortable. I think that's how God grows us as individuals, is sometimes he throws things into our lives that are uncomfortable. And I think by embracing the uncomfortable moments and introducing yourself to uncomfortable situations, that helps us grow as people and also closer to God. So if you're kind of in a sweep under the rug kind of place with talking about your child being LGBTQ, I'd say just kind of get the conversation going. Ask them how they are, where they are at in their journey, and just kind of meet them where they are. Just to let them know that you're available to talk about it whenever they want, whenever they're comfortable talking to you about it, and that you're there for them no matter what.
Yeah, I think that's a great place to end. So thank you, Randall. Thank you, Myles. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Lindsay and Susan. Thank you to our ASL interpreter. Just really appreciate you guys' willingness to share. I think our time is up. So I believe that people can still message us if they have follow-up questions. So feel free to do that if you've been watching and you had a question that didn't get answered. But otherwise, we hope you guys enjoy the rest of the conference. And God bless and thank you guys. This was great. So have a good rest of your day.